Caller
conference
one.
will now be recorded.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just called in.
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Mary,
Okay.
your voice is pretty low.
Okay, let me. Is it better now?
I
Yes.
think it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order at 1:02 p.m. First order of business is approval of the September 17th meeting minutes. Can I have a motion to approve?
I move we approve last week's meeting minutes.
Motion by Mr. Watson. Is there a second?
I'll second, Jennifer.
Second by Jennifer Sheldon. Any discussion, corrections, changes? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed, no. Carries unanimously. Okay, we'll move on. Discussion of booklet number 3. And just to repeat for those of you that didn't hear, I need to leave the meeting at 1:30. So Jennifer, as our vice chair, I'll ask you to take over once we get to 1:30, okay?
Sure.
Glenn, why don't you start us off and where we left off?
Yep. So let me apologize right off the bat to everybody. We got some roofing work going on here at the house. They're about to take a break, so he told me he's just going to finish up. So if you hear some nail guns in the background, it's me, and I apologize, but trying to get everything kind of worked out today. So it should be done fairly quickly here. My notes have us now picking up our discussion here on page 19. And I think that we had been through the concept about enabling accessory dwelling units and increasing the number of multifamily units. And we're simply going to refer back to the conversation we had when we talked about this previously. So I think we stopped then just before item 2.1.5 about reducing costs. And again, we had a prior discussion on this. So I think if it's okay with the committee, I think it's going to make sense for us to reorganize how we're presenting information here as part of this document. And I think rather than have a separate discussion on this, I'm just going to reintegrate the comments and consolidate all of that stuff. So I think, Chris, probably start a discussion here on 2.1.6. Does that sound okay to everybody? So 2.1.6 is one of the options in terms of addressing housing strategies for modest income households is to acquire or restrict or resell existing housing units. The town doesn't do this at the present time, but it is something that could happen in the future. One of the situations that we'll be talking about in the not too distant future is the concept of inclusionary zoning or requiring people as part of developments to set aside affordable units as part of a new development. And for developers who choose or may not want to do that on their particular property, one of the options that could be available there is that they might purchase and deed restrict existing housing units in Stratford. So I think, not suggesting that the town is going to budget dollars for purchasing and reselling housing units, but this might be a strategy that could make sense for us in the future if we were to encourage the private sector to consider doing this. What are people's thoughts on this particular strategy?
Are you thinking about doing something along the lines of what New Jersey has done?
What's New Jersey doing on this?
Proposing. This is where you would start a housing fund. Either developers would have a certain percentage, and that could be determined that would be dedicated for affordable housing, or they would have to contribute to a fund. We had discussed this, I think, like 3 meetings ago. But this is where that would fit, roughly.
Yep. So later on in the booklet, the concept of a housing fund is mentioned. I'm just trying to find the page number so that we know. So page 28 is the recommendation for establishing a housing trust fund. Fairfield did this recently. They're having some success with it. And I know that New Canaan's been doing this for some time. So I think, as Beth points out, that if funds do go into a housing trust fund, it might in fact be the housing partnership that might be providing recommendations to the council on spending of that fund, et cetera. And this could be one of the options that would be considered there. How do people feel about that option?
Glenn, this is Desmond. So just so I understand, is that so if a developer elects not to provide affordable housing within their development project, then they would redirect some funds into this fund for what purpose?
So I think, Desmond, we haven't gotten to the concept or the discussion yet of what's called inclusionary zoning. But inclusionary zoning is a zoning requirement that new residential development or new other types of development would set aside funds, set aside units to be affordable to people earning, less than 80% of area median income. So in some situations, that strategy works very well. For example, in new multifamily development, the units could be integrated. It doesn't work quite as well sometimes in a new subdivision or a fewer number of units. And so people could meet that obligation in other ways. And one of those ways could be for them to deed restrict an existing housing unit in Stratford, which is already affordable. But now it would be deed restricted as affordable and count towards our 830G total. So that was the thought here.
All right. And the result, I guess, is a net increase if they do that, right?
Yeah, so the unit, I would presume the developer would express most interest in acquiring an existing natural affordable housing unit, one that sells and rents at the affordable prices, but it doesn't count because it's not deed restricted. They would put a deed restriction on and sell the house back out.
Okay.
So it's
Gotcha.
could be more cost effective than building a new unit, and the community could benefit because now the unit is in fact deed restricted and could exist for years to come to help us meet our 830G goal.
Got it. Thanks.
But Glenn, that would only be if they're doing a larger development. If they're doing a smaller development, they would still have to put some to be determined amount into a housing trust fund.
Yeah, so I think there's different ways to do it, Beth, and that's one of them. Darien, for example, does have a requirement that either you provide the unit or you make a payment into the fund, and they actually require that even a fractional unit, a tenth of a housing unit, does require a payment. So your obligation is your obligation. And I think, we're going to need to talk about that. It's a concept which is considered appropriate in some communities, and other communities want to sort of modify elements of that program, and we're not quite there yet. I think that conversation, I believe, comes up on page just 25. Yeah, page 25 is where we're going to be talking about the inclusionary zoning strategies.
Okay, thank you.
So I think what I have here right now for 2.16 as part of my notes, everybody, is that we might consider this as part of our inclusionary zoning strategy, and we might consider using the housing trust fund for this type of situation. But otherwise, it might encourage, I guess, private organizations to do this. But for the town to come up with money to buy and resell is probably not something which is going to get a lot of traction.
Yeah, I think the concept needs further explanation. I can't even venture an opinion yet because I'm not sure exactly how it would work. So we could probably talk about that in more depth later.
Yep. And again, I think I've realized, just to the members of the committee, I originally thought it might help our discussion if I laid this out by different groups that would be affected by this in terms of an aging population, modest income owners, et cetera. I've come to realize from our discussion that we're going over topics 2 or 3 times, and it might be better to do it differently, and I'll do that the next time when I summarize our discussion.
I mean, for me, it helps talking about it, and I know there's some collateral there. But the solution that we prescribe, I guess, at the end of this exercise is going to be one that may intersect multiple groups, I'm assuming, right?
Exactly, Desmond. Yes, that's the way I see it going from here. I decided to kind of approach it differently the first time, and that might have been the better way. But I think as we go forward with our work, that'll be the best way for us to express this to other people.
Gotcha, yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Harold.
I know I'm partly stepping back into 21-5, but my concern is if a unit is foreclosed on for back taxes as an incremental step, it seems to me that where Stratford ends up with critical needs are people who are right at that edge. Is there any way that we can modify this or include in this the area before they fall down the precipice? Is there any way we can use this as a preventative measure to keep these people in those homes, not in foreclosure? But are we doing that in our discussions? Because that's where I think that's where Stratford watches a real social need happen again and again and again. And it certainly is going to be the case in the next 2 years if we get hit with the 5% mortgage foreclosure that they're expecting. This will become a very public problem.
Chris, may I ask a question of Harold?
Certainly.
Thank you. Harold, that's an interesting concept. So it would be like a purchase to lease idea. So if someone was in arrears in their taxes and you bought the lien or the note, your proposal is that you would offer the current resident the option to stay, though you owned the property, correct? And then you would put that property on a deed restriction for affordable.
That's what yes, in my thinking, that's what keeps coming up in my mind is that, a lot of these people just would love to spend the rest of their life in this situation. It's really hard to take a 75-year-old person and suddenly say, everything you know about life is changed. So I guess, yes, I do agree with kind of what you're saying. And I know it is fraught with its own problems, but it seems to me that part of our solution, if we really are going to step forward, has to address that in some way. And I look at our housing.
If you're not speaking, please go on mute. We're having a little bit of interference in here.
I keep looking at our foreclosed housing stock, and a lot of it is decent. Not all of it is what I would call hoarder houses. Some of it is actually could be put back into very good shape very quickly. So I don't know. I think in there somewhere is an area that we need to be thinking about, and I can guarantee it's going to be part of the public discussion when we get to it. So we might as well come up with some sensible thinking about it to present, because we will be questioning.
So I think I've got that, Harold. I've written that down. I think it's an evolution of all of these strategies, and I'll figure out a way to weave that in.
Jen, can you take over presiding? I'm getting called into a different meeting. I just got to drop off for a minute.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Go ahead.
So Jen, I think I'm ready to kick over to page 20 if the committee is.
Sounds good.
So I think here on page 20, what we're talking about here is modest income renters. How might we facilitate or ease their housing circumstances? And again, these are low or moderate income people. The town is really sort of not involved the present time on this. We are utilizing under the incremental steps, CDBG resources to support the Housing Authority and realtors and social service agencies with some of the things that they do. We can also try to work with HUD to try to get additional housing vouchers that will help address the needs of lower income families. But this concept of what's called tenant-based rental assistance, these are units where low and moderate income people get a voucher from the state or federal government. They find a qualifying unit, and then they are limited in terms of what they pay to a percentage of their income, and the state or federal government makes up the difference for what the unit actually rents. So the challenge is that that's an attractive program for lower moderate income people, but it's a competitive situation in terms of supply. So we can try to encourage awareness of this in using, try to get more vouchers. There is an incentive for people to locate their voucher in the community itself. I am working with another community that's actually thinking about providing local rental assistance to supplement. And the reason is that they get the unit as part of their 830G hierarchy. But again, this is it requires a source of dollars to make this work. But the issue could be if we get to a housing trust fund, this could be a use of those resources depending on the circumstances or the situation. How do we feel about promoting tenant-based rental assistance?
Glenn Desmond here.
Yep.
How does it differ from the current Section 8 program? What you just shared with us.
Desmond, good question. I mean, essentially, what we used to call Section 8, the terminology has transitioned now to, we call it the voucher program. There are some other programs that state and federal governments use or different names that they've given it. But essentially, the Section 8 program is a voucher program. A qualifying person gets admitted to the program, receives a voucher. With that voucher, they can find housing. And then it becomes a three-party transaction between the tenant, the landlord, and then the state or federal government, which makes up the financial difference. So it's very competitive. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the waiting list is in Stratford. If, well, Liz may know actually, but I think.
I was just going to say, Liz handles her staff handles this.
Yep. Liz, any sense of what the wait list is like for vouchers?
Well, our wait list, vouchers, let me give you a little bit of history about it. Once you have a voucher, you really don't give it up unless you become self-sufficient and you transition off the program, or unless you're you've committed some kind of violent act or drug-related activity. Those vouchers don't move that quickly. So in Stratford, we have 281 vouchers. Those are totally leased in our area. We also administer some of the state vouchers that J. D'Amelia and Associates was awarded. So they have the state contract through the state of Connecticut, and we subcontract with John D'Amelia and service those clients within our area. And the area that we service is Stratford, Bridgeport, Fairfield, the majority of which reside in Bridgeport. And of that, we have 1,200-ish, give or take on the month, that we service for that state program. The last time their wait list opened, they, meaning J. D'Amelia for the state, was about 5 years ago, and they got over 10,000 applicants. The wait lists don't open that frequently. Ours hasn't opened in a while, just because the people that are on the wait list wait a long time.
Is there any benefit to the town, Liz? Are there ways to enhance this program in terms of helping meet the housing needs of people either in Stratford or who want to live in Stratford? Are there things that Are we just subject to the state and federal program and it is what it is?
We're subject to the state and federal program. It is what it is. And to get vouchers is truthfully an act of God. Would have to come down and give you more vouchers. We've had 280. Just a few years ago, we got an additional 1 voucher since I've been here. And that was only because of a tenant protection situation that
Yep.
the participant moved into our town. And once that participant stayed for a year, that voucher became ours. That's the only way that we got the voucher. We have tried, I just actually recently tried to get a tenant protection voucher for someone and was referred back to our own program. So meaning once one of your vouchers become available, you can issue that voucher, but
Yep.
you're not getting more. So yeah, it's not easy to get.
And
Well, the interesting thing for Stratford, go ahead, Harold, I'm sorry.
I have a experience with a friend who I helped through this process. And this was about 3 or 4 years ago. And her only option was to move to Bridgeport or New Haven. There was no way she could stay in Stratford, which for me, I felt like was not the way to go. And we ended up going elsewhere. But I bet you that has all Liz.
And she had a housing choice voucher?
Yes. But the only thing available was the middle of New Haven or the middle of Bridgeport. She was on SDI also. So that with, anyhow, I don't want to go more into her background, but it really ended up being the region that she had to accept. So if we're trying to help Stratford people, this solution is limited, I think.
Well, it's dependent on how many rental properties there are in Stratford and how many of those are available. I haven't recently heard of a shortage of landlords that are willing to come onto the program. And the only incident that I see with your friend is that they were looking at things that were not affordable for them. Could that have been it? Or not bedroom size appropriate?
I think that affordability was part of it because of the amount of money she was getting from the state for all of her other needs. She was very limited in the amount, which was essentially lower than what a lot of going rate rents were in Stratford. So it meant that she had to go into the lowest available housing that was available, which was not in Stratford.
Okay, so Smita, you're
Yes, I think for the project-based voucher program, don't we have to be part of the moving to work plan and program list? I thought tenant-based is automatic, but
Well, we have project-based vouchers. We have 6 that are through Emerge. Those are for battered women, which are held by Emerge, and they work with us to fill those slots. And so basically, they use 6 of our vouchers to fill those slots for those types of situations. We recently, last year, I think it was September, we project-based 22 of our Shiloh units as project-based vouchers. That's over on Henry Ave. The reason we had to do that is because those are state projects and we do not get any funding from the state. So long-term, we will not be able to repair or maintain those units because the residents that we have living there can only afford the base rent. So we need to come up with a way to get more income into that property, and we did that with project-based vouchers.
I can jump in just for a sec, so that everybody in the committee knows there's 2 types of vouchers. tenant-based, which means that the voucher follows the tenant, and if they choose to locate in a different municipality or a different property within Stratford, they can take that certificate with them. The other type is project-based, as Liz points out, where the voucher rests with the unit, and then if the unit becomes available, it's the landlord's responsibility to find a qualifying person to occupy, but it's basically sort of fixed in Stratford specifically. So Liz, the 281 number that you mentioned earlier for the number of vouchers, is that both project-based and tenant-based?
Yes.
So what's significant here, people, is that we have a situation, according to the state's Affordable Housing Appeals List, Stratford gets credit for 446 tenant-based rental units. And we
Well,
have two.
That could be if you're talking about the program, because we also administer the state program or that those vouchers in this area through J. D'Amelia and Associates.
Yep.
So those encompass a total of about 1,200. So when Susmitha needs those numbers, I look at that program and see how many of those individuals are actually residing in Stratford.
Yep.
Okay.
And so you can have people who also get tenant-based vouchers, for example, in Bridgeport, Fairfield, or other communities, and they choose to live in Stratford. And so those units count to our affordable housing appeals list. And the fact that there's 165 more units here than we otherwise get vouchers for is partially a recognition we have an affordable housing stock today. But if we were able to attract more of those units or more of those tenants, we also get units which apply to our affordable housing appeals list numbers. Is there any way to do that, Liz, or basically, again, it is what it is, and the program is going to sort of ebb and flow naturally, or is there anything the town can do to try to improve this situation, get more units which count towards 830G, et cetera?
Through the voucher program, not that I'm aware of.
All right, so I think, listening to Liz, unless it is what it is, I think that.
Well, currently, I think that once the federal programs evolve, that may change in the future. Because basically, when you have a structure and it's public housing, those units need to be maintained by the federal government. Once you give a voucher and that individual goes out into the private market, so basically the federal government has to maintain the rent, whatever that portion is, but they don't have to maintain the property. They don't have to pay the taxes. They don't have to, change or fix the roof and, replace windows and doors. That falls on the property owner or the landlord. So I think that they're recognizing that over the long term, the voucher program is the better way to go.
Glenn, Desmond
yes.
here too. From what I see, kind of being part of the business, there is, and I mentioned at one of our meetings a couple of weeks ago, there is a lot of interest from folks looking to get into Stratford. What I see, and knowing other people also in the business, is that we don't have typically enough to satisfy the need of people that want to move into Stratford, either with vouchers or without vouchers. There are many people from the Waterburys and the Bridgeports and the Derbys and Sonias that would love to live in Stratford for many reasons, but usually they can't find a property, or what they're approved for doesn't meet the market rate. Again, a lot of it is just pure supply and demand economics, with where the prices are for units in Stratford. But that's what I'm seeing a lot, and talking to other people on the ground. I don't know if that jives with what Liz sees, but just want to add that context for the group.
Just out of curiosity, how much does the voucher pay for?
It depends on the tenant situation. So it depends on how much the income the participant earns. So that can vary from 100% of the HAP, which is the housing assistance payment, to a portion thereof. And that portion can vary from $1 to, total rent.
Okay, and so what's 100, like, just give me an idea, what's 100% for, for 2 people? If it were to pay 100%, what does that translate into dollars?
2 people meaning a 2-bedroom, or 2 people, a couple in a 1-bedroom?
Yeah, a couple in a 1-bedroom.
Give me 1 second and I'll find out for you.
Okay, I don't mean to hold up the meeting though, I'm sorry.
No, I think Beth just gives me a chance to jump in. I think the comment, the next page is a variation of this discussion, because the next page is about project-based, where we've just been talking about tenant-based. I think the conversation we've been having here applies to both. So when Liz comes back, we're probably going to jump to page 22. So go ahead, Liz.
I'm back. Between 1,000 and 1,100 for a 1-bedroom.
So that is on the low end again, in Stratford.
So but I think that going back to what Desmond said earlier, I think the challenge we're going to have here is the program is what it is. The market in Stratford is going to, newer and better maintained properties are going to rent for more. Older properties, less well maintained, will rent for less. And it's possible that over time, the number of units is going to fluctuate both on the basis of the supply and demand of people and funding and units. So there's perhaps not much chance for the town to intervene here and try to encourage more, but it is an important consideration overall. So I think if the committee is comfortable, I'll try to summarize our conversation and bring it back for everybody to take a look as part of our next step in the process. Anything else on tenant or project-based rental assistance?
I guess I'm just confused. Are we recommending any action here?
I think
Like we are.
I don't, my notes, Beth, based on our conversation, indicate that it's something that we should continue to be aware of, participate in, promote, and encourage. But in terms of, the town's ability to throw in additional funding or anything else, that might be something we could use the housing trust fund for. But other than that, I'm not sure that there's any fertile ground here for us to pursue. Do you have a?
No, in terms of anything else, I'm not even seeing how the housing, I guess I'm just not seeing the entree here for, other than awareness and sensitivity training, or for the general public. I'm just not sure what our entree here is.
Now, again, I mentioned I'm working with another municipality that's seeking to attract people with these certificates to their community. And so they're thinking of, working with somebody, the equivalent of Liz, that, $100 a month or something else could make a big difference for somebody, and the town gets to count the unit. So, but they have a source of funds available to them, which they're willing to spend for this. So it's a bit of a reach or a stretch for us. And again, I'm not quite sure it's fertile ground.
Okay.
Smitha, go ahead.
Glenn, I just have one comment. I know we're too early in the process, but as we're speaking, it is becoming more clear that who is responsible for what strategy. So when you come up with towards the end of the report, maybe you can, further refine this, saying this is Housing Authority's role versus Town of Stratford's role.
Good for you.
Yeah, and also like, what is the priority, rank of priority? Like which one should we be doing right away in the next 2-3 years versus which ones are more longer term?
And I think, once we've got a chance to get through the conversation and organize them based on the ones that we think are the most fruitful for us, I think the public input and the feedback we get from planning, zoning, council, and others will help us set those priorities. Okay. And I'm a firm believer in identifying who's responsible or who are the leaders or partners on different types of strategies. So it's very clear who has responsibility to implement. So you're way ahead of me. I'm aware of all of that, but I haven't done it yet.
Okay, sorry. I just was thinking as Liz was speaking that, it becomes more important to clarify Absolutely. The roles.
Yeah, and I think everybody in the committee needs to know that that's what we're going to end up with. So thank you for that.
Okay.
And
so,
just
go ahead, Harold.
Comment, Glenn. This would become very ripe if we actually move forward with the idea of accessory apartments. I assume, correct? You could have homeowners applying for this for their accessory unit, even for a senior in their home or for a caregiver in their home. So long term, this might be something very valuable for Stratford, and maybe that should be included, that if we're building out our system, this is something that will come as a result of these actions.
So I don't think a project-based rental assistance would work in that scenario, but it's quite possible that somebody who receives a voucher could find an accessory apartment unit, and we would have a confluence of two different activities going on here that, yes, it could work that way. I think maybe from a policy perspective, we'll keep the thought process separate, but in real life, it's possible they could come together. So I have us now at the top of page 22. There's really, I don't think there's any policy direction here at the time. Just I wanted you to know that the state does have a program for rental rebate for low and moderate income people, and it's up to a $900 check if you meet the income guidelines here. And again, it depends on what your income is as to what the check is that's available. I'm not sure there's much additional benefit for the municipality to kick in dollars here, but it is a way to help address the housing costs of low and moderate income people. So unless you can see some policy or strategy angle for the town here, this is mostly just for information.
I think for us is awareness. I'm in the business and I didn't know about that. Part of it is on me, but you know, could one of our imperatives be to make the public aware of these programs that may benefit them?
Very good.
So
I agree with you. I think that's great. That's a great recommendation.
it's on the tax assessor's website because it's the senior rental rebate program.
And Mayor, is that only available to seniors or anybody that meets a certain income threshold?
This one is primarily seniors, but I think it's seniors 55 and over. But I'll while we're still talking, I'll look it up and tell you.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, because I think I had done some research on this and it didn't click with me that it was age limited. So if it is, that would be very helpful information. I thought it was only income limited, so that'd be great to let us know that. I think on the bottom of page 22, we've already again talked about accessory dwelling units and increasing the number of multifamily units. So I think I'll carry that conversation in our notes forward, unless anybody has any additional thoughts on those. So I think I'd like to continue the discussion then on the top of page 23, which is similar to a conversation we had before. The conversation we had before was about seeking opportunities to increase housing for an aging population, particularly lower income elderly. And this sort of was a discussion we'd had about the opportunities for the housing authority. And now we have a similar conversation here, which is for family units. Now, family units, again, are not elderly. And elderly units, as you're also aware from our prior conversation, is open for residency by disabled people as well. But family units are non-elderly. It can include disabled, though, also. But there are some different ways that we could go with regard to this. The incremental steps is working with Liz and the Housing Authority on ways to increase the number of family units in town, possibly allowing more density, height, or coverage at properties that some of the Housing Authority properties the time that they were built was sort of one-story individual or duplex units, et cetera. So there's a possibility to redevelop these properties and sort of get more units on them. But that's something, again, we need to start to feel comfortable with. Support applying for a choice neighborhood planning grant to support redevelopment of some of these areas. And then bigger steps are actually, try to jump out in front on these and lead the way in terms of increasing the number of family units townwide or seeking other opportunities to provide for housing for low and moderate income families. What are your thoughts on the best strategies for Stratford in these areas?
Glenn?
Yep.
Sorry, Jennifer, can I ask a question to Glenn?
Yes, you can, Susmitha.
I forgot the process.
It's okay, I'm still figuring out the process, don't worry.
Glenn, I think choice neighborhood application also requires a connection with an educational institution or the location of an educational facility nearby. I was looking into it more, so it's just to think through this, how if we were to think about El Grasso Boulevard site as a possible location for a choice neighborhood application, then how can we tie it into not just the immediate neighborhood improvements, but also educational connection in that neighborhood?
Okay, thank you. So I think this also part of the conversation we had earlier was that one of the challenges with the main housing authority areas on, drawing a blank for a moment on the street names, but the challenge we have of coastal sea level rise, flooding, and other types of environmental risks place sites which seem to have land available for development and redevelopment, but they're in a flood area or an area with flooding potential. So our choices are to leave what's there, try to find new sites elsewhere in the community, or try to redevelop in a way where the units are elevated. But again, that's still keeping more people in an environmentally challenged area. The units may not flood because they'd be up above flood elevation, but you wouldn't be able to get to them because for a while they would be flooded. And so there are issues related to environmental justice and other things that are all tied up in this. And so here we are faced with housing needs, but it can be a bit of a challenge for us. How do you think it might be appropriate for Stratford to address this? Go ahead, Beth. Yeah.
Is another option to try to make it smaller, rather than having these larger developments, to have small developments throughout town, rather than large developments and concentrated? Is that another option, or?
I think it could be. Back in the 60s and 70s, the general approach was to do larger projects with more units because it was more cost efficient. And
Right.
that option may be a bigger challenge for us these days. So it's perhaps more expensive on a unit basis, but I think it's certainly something we could add to the mix.
Sure, I know many urban areas have walked away from the philosophy of having large developments and instead having small, 6 to 8 units dispersed rather than large developments, just because of the social effects. If you look at just places I've lived, Chicago got rid of, they tore down their very large developments. Pittsburgh has also, and they've gone for the smaller developments too. But I really don't know anything about this field, so I don't know what resources are available for that sort of option. But certainly having people live in older units in environmentally vulnerable areas is not a good policy.
Go ahead, Harold.
I just wanted to add, I know exactly what you're speaking about in terms of, because I was on the Coastal Resiliency Committee, and that is a floodplain, and that is listed as one of our serious problems that Stratford has to address in the coming decade. But one of the things that is a real recommendation of our coastal resiliency research so far is that we can mitigate by building dikes and dams. So partly that area that is the most buildable, if it weren't underwater, is an area that also that there was plans on putting a dike through there. So if we could combine both sea level rise mitigation and HUD requirements there into one project, a demonstration project that would actually create a buffer, not maybe for 100 years, not maybe for 50, but even for 20 years, that's a valid way of looking at this, of building a protective barricade that could also become the foundation for housing that would protect the whole neighborhood to the north of there. That's something that actually, so Smith could probably give you more details in this, but it's something that we should consider because there is funding for these kind of demonstration projects because every town along the coast has the same problem.
Jennifer, if I may speak.
Yes, go ahead, Susmitha.
Yes, Harold, we are looking into a program called BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure. I don't know the acronym for C, but that program was recently announced, and we are actually looking at that option. John Casey and myself, we were talking to consultants yesterday regarding that possibility of how, near Access Road, if we were to consider some resilient infrastructure, how it can protect the south end, the entire south end. And this is a totally different conversation, but I'd be happy to report to the Planning Commission on this. Not sure if we're going to apply.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah. Regarding Beth DePonte's comment on, having smaller sized affordable housing developments, we have looked into this when I was in New Haven quite a bit. And when we spoke to realtors and developers, their only complaint is that the cost of construction is so high that if they don't get subsidized some way, either through additional density or through some kind of funding streams, they will not be able to build smaller sized affordable housing developments.
But this would be in substitute for the Stratford Housing Authority. Or no, that's not how this is done?
Well, I don't know if Housing Authority does get so much from the federal government anymore to do that kind of developments. And I know they just formed their development company, but I'm not sure if they have those many funds to invest.
No, we don't. So basically, if we're looking at the flood zone properties, we would have to, for the federal units, apply to demolish those units and to rebuild. But it all takes money. So it would depend on the approval to demolish and the approval to rebuild, and where would those funds come from? Would the federal government, give us the money to do that? For the state units, I want to say no, that would never happen for our state family units that are in the flood zone, simply because the state doesn't have the money. And I truthfully don't see it happening for our state family units in the flood zone. I don't.
Okay, thank you for that.
Unfortunately.
Liz, have you had any conversations with HUD or the federal government about the challenging situation that Stratford has? It'd be a real shame if we were to lose units. Now, there's two ways we could lose. Number one is we have to take them down before we rebuild. That involves a huge dislocation of people. And the second one would just be, over time with flooding and sea level rise and other things, we would lose the units. Have you received any input or feedback from the federal government in terms of how Stratford could approach this?
No, only because they're aware that we're in a flood zone. We pay for a flood policy for those units. We are that which is included in our subsidy. So when we pay for the flood policies, that's an allowable expense on the subsidy report each year. The federal government doesn't have the money to take down all the flood properties in the US and rebuild. They don't. We're looking at that through our strategic planning process. We've never had a strategic plan, and we're currently trying to finalize one. And the hope is to come up with plans that would cure the issue. But like you said before, so even if you build up so that you're elevating the buildings and you're putting in elevators, so now if there is a flood situation,
We're talking about a problem that doesn't
those
really.
people can't get in. But the reverse is also true. When those buildings need to be evacuated, now you have more people to evacuate from those areas.
Yep.
So is that the
But Liz,
best way to go?
Liz, it's Laura. How many units have been adversely affected by flood?
Since I've been here, none.
That's what I mean. So I think we're talking about a problem that for the immediate, we may not need to address. However, if those units come up for remodeling or whatever I forgot what the program is that when you get to refurbish those units, maybe that's
Right.
the time the federal government might let us go up a floor if they're strong enough, put the living conditions on the top floor and then the parking on the bottom, and that would give you more, theoretically more density, air quotes, so that you can
Right.
take your parking area and put it underneath your units. But that just a thought. Thanks for letting me.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've been talking about different scenarios. So our consultant, the one that we use, basically, put the fear of God into our commissioners that, the floodplains keep changing and they keep rising. So basically, he's like, will those units be sustainable in 20 years? We don't know. But based on what's going on in the world, is it possible? It is possible.
Susmitha, go ahead.
I just want to add that FEMA has a program to elevate structures, and we just had, one property almost ready to go. We applied for 3 properties last year, and 1 is ready to go, but we haven't yet cleared the final step. But in between this time, in the last year, they changed some of their mapping. So now we are required to elevate 2 feet above base flood elevation, not just 1 foot, in the coastal flood zone, AE zone, which is more like a waterfront coastal zone construction. So it has been so problematic because the property owner wants what she wants, even though she's getting 100% funded. It's just like, there are some elements of her house that cannot be retained, even if, it is elevated as is. And there might be some expenditure from her pocket because the grant requirements are so stringent. So even though the federal program reopened again for applications this fall, like I think it's gonna open, and we got the announcement 2 weeks back, it might open like October 1st or something.
Okay.
I'm still not as clear if that would be of great help to Stratford. Once I'm clear about that, Liz, I will reach out to you. And if you have any properties that are housing authority owned that are in flood zones, that may be a good candidate to look
Okay.
into. We can
Okay.
apply as many properties as we want, like a whole street also we can apply for that. But, we just have to be mindful that there are some things that we can't get what we want in these kind of grant situations.
Right. Yeah, I'd appreciate that, and I'll do my research from my end on it as well.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Thanks for
Liz,
that
you had
info.
indicated that you're working on a strategic plan for the housing authority or whatever. So there are a bunch of challenges here that really require coordination with all of these other agencies and entities. Should the policy of the town here be to let the housing authority lead the way on this and for us to support you in your efforts, or are there other things that the town can or should do to try to promote this? Right now, it's sort of almost every way we turn, there's some reason why things have a challenge associated with them. What do you think our strategy should be?
Well, I think our current strategy, just working with Smitha on a constant basis, has really helped the authority, and I believe will eventually help the town for that coordinated effort, because the goal is to protect the residents and our buildings throughout town, and to make it cohesive with the neighborhood. So I think that we've made great strides in that effort so far. So I want to thank Laura too, for making her staff available to us. It's been a great working relationship so far.
My pleasure, Liz.
So I think we're almost out of time here for our meeting this week. It would seem to me that in coastal resilience conversations and discussion, they talk about sort of doing nothing and armoring where we're at. And I think we kind of discussed some of those options. And then the other concept is one that they call retreat, but I'm not a big fan of that word, but I think in our cases, it's probably adapt, which is, are there other sites, other options or opportunities on site to try to address those issues? And I think we should recast this discussion sort of in that way. Does that sound like a reasonable approach for people?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Good. So I think, Jen, I'm going to suggest that this is a good break point, and I have us next time starting on page 24. The big discussion is probably going to be on page 25, which is, again, this concept of inclusionary zoning. So I think Smith has set up meetings for next week and beyond. And if you guys are ready, I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Glenn.
Great. I think we just need a motion to adjourn. Do we need that?
So moved.
Second.
Liz, Harold? Great, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Bye-bye.